Setting up your meeting. Good evening and welcome to Artistry tonight. My name is Jonathan Plant and welcome. So glad to be here for a second Thursday. My guest this evening is American composer Jake Heggie. Jake was in West Palm Beach, but he and his three siblings grew up in that city just south of Ann Arbor, Michigan. Some of you might know that's Columbus. Jake began studying piano when he was just 7 years old. In 1972, not long after his father passed away, Jake began composing new music. In addition to 8 full-length operas, several one-act operas, Jake has composed nearly 300 art songs, as well as concertos, chamber music, and numerous choral and orchestral works. Jake's operas have been produced on 5 continents, and last year, his opera Dead Man Walking received its 70th international production at the Israeli Opera Company in Tel Aviv, the first American opera to be produced by that company. There is so much to say about Jake as a musician, as a man, as a friend of mine, but we'll get to that over the course of this half an hour. Before I introduce Jake and put him on the screen, I just want to say that we are live on Facebook, I think, and I have another computer here, and I just welcome you to post questions in the comments section. Would be super. That's where I will be looking, and that's where everybody can see the same questions. Just going here to make sure that I have it. Terrific. And we will get to your questions toward the end. And Jake, it's so great to see you.
Oh, it's great to be seen.
Where are you right now?
I'm in San Francisco at home, where I live, and where we've been, doing our shelter-in-place thing ever since sort of the beginning of March. But it's been the most beautiful spring here. We had a lot of rain in March, and everything is just exploding. All the flowers, all the plants. It's a very beautiful time in the city.
And your shelter-in-place is going well. You're staying busy.
Oh yeah, we're taking long walks in the afternoon and evening, actually, because we live in a very hilly area, so it's good exercise. And also we've been sort of rediscovering neighborhoods that we hadn't been in for ages or had never been in, and meeting new neighbors, waving to them as they're walking, because a lot of people are out walking in the evenings, and that's actually been really, really nice. And during the day, I go to my studio, which is about a mile from the house, and I try to work in there best I can. I've actually been able to write quite a bit, which is surprising to me, considering how distracted and uncertain everything feels.
Yeah, absolutely. So last Thursday night, I spoke with your work wife, the legendary opera singer Frederica von Stade. And in learning about her early years, I learned that Flicka's dad had died 2 months before she was born in the war. And in reading up on your history, I learned that your dad committed suicide when you were 10 years old. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to know his influence on you as a person, as a man, as a composer and pianist. If you won't mind just talking about that.
Sure. Well, he was an MD, he was a doctor, a medical doctor, and he worked for a laboratory company called Ross Laboratories. And he actually wound up moving a lot, because he was in the Korean War. He was they were stationed in actually in Japan. And my mom and my eldest sister was born there. And then my other sister was born in New York, because my dad was from New York, from Long Island, and my mom was from Passaic, New Jersey. And then they moved to Florida again for his work, and I was born there. And then they moved to Los Angeles, where my brother was born. So all 4 kids were born in different places. And then we moved to Ohio. But what was constant was his love for music, especially big band. He was an amateur jazz saxophonist, and through him I met like Ella Fitzgerald, Frank Sinatra, Peggy Lee, Tommy Dorsey, Artie Shaw, Joe Stafford, all these great singers and instrumentalists. And then my mom and family, we all loved the big movie musicals of that time. And so we spent a lot of time as a family listening to music and listening to him play. And the record player was always going with all different kinds of music. And I'd say that was a huge influence on me, especially because it was so clear how much he loved it and how much he wanted to inhabit it full time. He was a second generation American to Hungarian immigrants. And so he basically had a choice, doctor or lawyer, being a musician was not on the table. So I think that was frustrating for him. But he also suffered from depression, which my parents kept really well hidden from us. So his suicide was a huge shock because I didn't know there was anything wrong. I was blissfully involved with music with my friends. All of us were fine. I mean, we had our quarrels and everything. We all lived in a very small house, but they kept it really, really well hidden. So of course that my life turned upside down at that moment. Yeah.
You weren't composing at that point. I mean, he passed when you were just 10 years old. You were obviously playing piano already, but
Yeah.
you didn't really start composing until, from what I read, not long after he died.
Yeah. Music really became my refuge. And this is something I always tell young people is, very young people, is if you have music in your life, if it's in your core, if you love it, even though life can be very lonely, you're never really alone. I remember my mom recently asked me, who were your role models during that period? How did you get through all of that? Because I was very independent. And I said, my role models and my guides were Beethoven, Schubert, Mozart, Bach, Chopin, Debussy, all those great composers that I loved and their music. And also the great singers that I felt reflected what I was feeling inside. So Barbra Streisand was a huge influence on me early on. And my dad died, and a week later I turned 11, and I had a paper route, and I used my money on my paper route to buy music at the music store and scores. And I wasn't sure if I was going to continue with piano because it was so associated with him. And my mom convinced me to keep going. And I went to the music store and I found manuscript paper, just blank music paper. And I asked the guy, what's this for? And he said, well, that's so you can write music. And I said, can you do that? And he said, yes. And so I thought, well, I'm going to give that a try. And so I started writing music and songs and piano pieces at 11 years old, and I just never stopped.
It's fascinating because one of the questions that I want to talk to you about, the topics, is song.
Yeah.
And this idea of pop song, cabaret, and song within the genre of opera. You've written over 300 art songs, and I'm curious to know from your perspective what makes a good song, and maybe share with us a couple examples of songs that we would all know. Our audience, I'm really targeting sort of not the amateur musician, but the learner of all things music rather than just the opera buff or the choral buff.
Right. Well, I didn't know anything about classical or art song or opera singers when I was a kid. My heroes were Barbra Streisand, Julie Andrews, Carly Simon, Linda Ronstadt, all those people. So I loved all the music from that period, and I still do. When we have an evening just at home where we're cooking, we've got Pandora on or something, we listen very regularly to the Linda Ronstadt station or the Katie Lang station, just because I feel very comfortable in that field. Both me and my husband do. So I would say those influences, but then later I started studying composition when I was about 16. We moved to California, and I found a composition teacher who happened to write art songs, and I wanted to get more serious about it. He told me about Schubert and Schumann and Wolf and all these great composers that I didn't know about, and also what an art song is, and that I didn't have to write my own texts all the time. I could set, existing great poetry. And so I started doing that. But I'd say songs that were really influential to me, the Winterreise of Schubert, Erlkönig of Schubert, the Schumann Dichterliebe, this wonderful cycle that's just so full of beauty and ache and longing. Um, like I said, all the pop songs of that era that I loved. Samuel Barber's "Sure on This Shining Night," which is probably his most famous song. I learned that for the first time. It's really hard to point out a particular song. The Ravel Scheherazade. I was already kind of into classical by then, and so once he opened that door and I started hearing these other kinds of singers, it kind of turned my world upside down. But I also heard, I loved Sondheim, and I still do. And I heard Angela Lansbury sing Sweeney Todd on the first national tour of that in like 1981. And that kind of, the top of my head popped off. And, it was getting to know that the lyric theater could be so many things, including all these great singers that I loved and the great music that I loved, that was influenced by so many different things. And I thought, well, maybe I could have a place on that stage too. I don't know.
I imagine as a conductor conducting one of your songs, obviously I direct choirs, I do a fair amount of conducting, and I think about interpreting music. I spend a lot of time thinking about how to interpret what someone else composed. And I suppose it's easier to do that when the composer is not alive. You and I have worked together. I have conducted with you at the piano. Our interpretations met in the middle. I remember that first rehearsal together, and it was, oh, that's what the intent was. Okay. What is it that you want from a conductor?
Well, and you also asked what goes into making a good song. And to me, there's, ultimately we're looking for clarity, inevitability, and surprise all at once. That's whether it's a great pop song, so that like you hear a great new pop song and it sounds like, well, of course, it's always been like that. And yet someone just wrote that and it sounds inevitable. Like, of course it goes like that. That's what you're looking for, whether it's an art song or a pop song. And an art song really is more of a study of the poetry that you're setting. And it's very different from writing for the theater or the stage. That's why, a lot of these composers who wrote beautiful art songs didn't often write very good stage works or operas, because it's a very different kind of a thing. But to me, looking in, it's before there are words, before there's music, there's an event, there's a transformative event, there's something that it's about, that inspired a poet, that inspired a writer, and then inspires me. I call this going to the well, where there's an experience or an event, and that rich event inspires a writer to go digging around and pull something out that is meaningful to them through words. Then it's my job as a composer to take those words and the structure they've given me, but then go back into the well and see how that feels. How does that event feel to me? So that my setting of that poem or that text is going to be very different from someone else's setting. And yet the intent, and what I'm looking for is like a rhythmic profile to it, a melodic, a harmonic profile, so that it feels like, of course it's set that way, of course it sounds that way, because it feels that natural and innate to me. It's part of my job is to empathize with a writer, with the performer, with the character, and try to get as much of that on the page as possible, with notations, with tempi, with all kinds of indications, so that a conductor or a singer can come along and they can look at everything that I've put on the page, and then it's their turn to go to the well and see how that resonates for them. Because if there's only one way to do a song or a piece, it's probably not a very good piece. It has to be open and flexible to many different interpretations and perspectives, many different trips to the well. So that, because everyone's going to bring something different and something personal to that song or to that role or piece.
So do you say, and I'm going off my own script here, would you say that you fall in between the Mozart and the Mahler as far as notation of what the instructions are? I mean, Mozart, you might get a dynamic here and there, whereas Mahler, I mean, it's as if he's telling you, how to hold the bow, let alone play the bow. So you fall somewhere in the middle.
I fall more in the Mozart vein because no, I want there to be clarity. And as you perform a piece, that's where you learn where the tricky spots are that need that specific clarity. where you need an indication, a tempo, a new tempo, or a marking of some kind to make sure that that is really, really clear. But otherwise, I don't want to micromanage the performer. I want them to have the ability to bring what they have to it, and so that eventually I will learn something from the song, or I will learn something that I didn't know was in there, because of that individual and what they bring. And you have to remember too, when Mozart wrote, there was a common practice. So certain tempi
Sure.
meant certain things. If you said allegro, that meant a certain thing. Now you say allegro, well, I don't know what that means. It could mean 100,000 different things. And by the time Mahler was writing, he was very, very precise on what he wanted to hear and how he wanted it to go. And I still believe he wanted personality and wiggle room there, but he still wanted, what he had put on the page. And I still want what I put on the page, but I'm very interested to see how it's going to move or influence someone. So I try to be as clear as possible with tempo indications and where I want it to move, where I want it to pull back. But other than that, I really want the singer to bring what they have to it. I'm not a composer that sort of writes these crazy, tempos or crazy meters like 11/16 and then 7/8 and then this, to try to sort of micromanage exactly how it's going to slow down or speed up. I'm just going to write slower, faster, more, less, and maybe give a word like joyfully or dynamically or with energy or urgently that gives you a sense of the character that I had in mind.
Do you ever go back to a piece and say the piece really wasn't done? It's not done today. That you hear a piece, Dead Man Walking with 70 performances and I imagine, or 70 productions rather. I imagine you've not seen all 70, but when you saw 64 and you went to 64 and you said, I really should have changed measure 4001. That always bothered me. I know as a conductor, certainly, I listen to recordings of something I did years ago and say, what was I thinking? What is it like to hear one of your pieces and is it done?
Yes. You have to know when it's done, though. You have to be willing to let go and move on. And frankly, the lucky thing for me is that I've been so busy with so much to do, and I do work better when I'm that busy. There has to be chaos going around for me to be able to write, and it has to be urgent. I have to feel that the necessity to write it now. I find with something as big as an opera, it's usually about, because we don't get previews. So we do a workshop, we try to fix it in rehearsal, but the last character to show up in any opera is the audience. And that audience shows up on opening night when the opera is shot out of a cannon. We haven't really had a chance to work on it. So that first run is when the creative team is really learning about the piece. And so then if we're lucky enough to have future productions, then we try new things in the second production. And it's usually about the third production that I finally feel like it's landed, it's done. That's what I had in mind. Sometimes a director or a conductor will come to me and say, had you ever thought about making this jump or this cut or, and I'm wide open to those kinds of ideas. I love cuts. Cuts make me very happy. Rewrites are really challenging because it means getting back into the headspace of something that you finished a year ago. That's really, really hard to do. But, every piece that I look at that's done, like if I look at Dead Man Walking, which I wrote over 20 years ago, I look at it as a snapshot of who I was at that period in my life. Just like when I listen to performances from when I was in college, that's a snapshot of who I was then, and that's fine. And you just have to be happy and at peace with that. And if I were writing Dead Man Walking from scratch today, would it be different? Totally different, probably, because I feel like I've changed a lot over 20 years. I'm essentially the same person, but I've grown, I've had other experiences. So of course I would bring something different to it and it would sound different, but I have to respect what it was when I wrote it. And it seems to work pretty well. So I'm going to leave it alone. The same thing pretty much with all the operas. The one that premiered last summer, If I Were You, we're in the process of doing some rewrites because it will have a couple productions next season, hopefully, and we'll be able to hear it again and get it to its finished stage. But it's a long journey. Yeah,
it is a long journey, and Dead Man Walking has had such an impact, both musically, but also just the subject. Of course, it was a major motion picture and is the story, for folks that don't know, of Sister Helen Prejean, a nun who went to visit a death row inmate. I'm curious to know, and I might say that the inmate was executed.
Yes.
And I'm curious to know, have you spoken with Sister Helen recently? And because I know you're obviously dear friends, and just bringing it a little current, her thoughts on COVID-19, her thoughts on what's going on in society today politically, and so forth.
Well, thankfully, I mean, I should connect you with her so that you can talk to her directly. When we talk, we're talking about what we're going through personally and what we're working on, and we try to. I've been trying as much as possible to avoid the news lately, just because it's there's so much spinning and talking and speculation, and it's all a little mind numbing. I think it's very important to pay attention, to be aware. When I talk to her, we do talk about how mismanaged things seem to be, and how confusing and uncertain it is, and that they're in a time like this, and really any time, what people are yearning for is honesty and the truth, and that's what Dead Man Walking is about. Is a journey to the truth, a journey to the truth of an identity, a spiritual crisis, a family in crisis, a man in crisis. The truth of the act that he did and the repercussions of it. The truth of, is there redemption or is there only damnation? Is there hope? Is there possibility, or is there not? And I think those are topics that we talk about. In fact, I'm just about to do a big conversation with Sister Helen and Joyce DiDonato about all the works that we have shared, which include 2 big song cycles as well as Dead Man Walking, which is hopefully going to be at the Met next year.
I was going to ask about that. Before I get to that,
yeah.
Terrence McNally, the famous playwright, you worked together on countless projects, and he passed away of coronavirus on March 24th. And I actually, I read something that he said about you, and I might say that you're the one who introduced me. I wasn't friends with Terrence McNally, but you introduced me to him, and it was a real honor to just shake his hand. But Terrence said about you, I've never seen Jake do anything unkind or unpleasant. I've seen him get his way.
That's funny. Terrence, look, he wrote the libretto for Dead Man Walking. He wrote the libretto for Great Scott, which premiered at the Dallas Opera, where you are. He wrote the libretto for a scene we wrote called the Statue of Venus. I set the final monologue from his masterclass, his play Masterclass about Maria Callas. And we worked together very closely on a lot of things, and we were great friends. The thing about Terrence that I always remember is he believed so strongly in possibility, and he saw potential where other people didn't see it. He helped create so many careers because he spotted talent and he believed in it. And that includes mine, because he believed in me before I think there was much to believe in, actually. And he, Audra McDonald's career, Joe Mantello's career, so many people who he helped along the way, and saw talent and potential, and he believed in serendipity, like, well, they're here right now, and this is the kind of person I'm looking for, so let's go for it. And I think I will always take that away. But I also saw him, I guess that comment is funny, because I learned a little bit about that from him, about being professional and being honest and kind. Not nice, because I think nice people will tell you whatever you want to hear, but kind, because I personally want to hear the truth, but I like it told to me in a kind way, and I think I learned that from him and from Flicka. She's a great mentor and role model as well. But I miss him. I miss Terrence terribly. He was a really great friend and a great man.
I can say from personal experience, Jake, that I've seen you teach in a masterclass setting here in Dallas at SMU, and you are a master teacher, and kind and nice, and honest, and it was really beautiful. Before we go to my little list of 10 questions, I have
Sure.
I have just a couple of brief questions here. And I do want to remind our audience, and we do have an audience, which is lovely. Um, Feel free to ask questions. Just write it in the comment box there, and we'll get to those questions at the very end. Um, Dead Man Walking is supposed to have its Metropolitan Opera um, debut in April. I certainly wish you the best for that. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what will happen, but we are all hoping for that. You did you gave an interview on Opera Wire recently, where the question was asked, "What can we learn from this global pandemic?" Um, but I want to ask a little bit more pointed question, and that is, what kind of art and music do you think will come from this pandemic, and what kind of music will we see when this is over?
That's a very good question, and I don't think anyone really knows the answer. I know that my composition and composing colleagues are very inspired and eager to tell the story of this time and stories like it through time. And I know that singers, our great singer friends who have been silenced by this because, the stages are closed, and they've tried to find ways to perform online, but that's a very, very different experience. That kind of singing is meant to be heard live. But I think people are going to be very creative. I think they're going to want to embrace music that, soothes and calms and uplifts and excites and inspires us. But I think people are going to be very curious as to how we're going to tell the story of this time. One of the projects that I'm involved with is a new song cycle for Jamie Barton. And I've asked a lot of writers and colleagues and other friends to write down a sentence, a poem, a limerick, a rhyme, anything, a meditation, and tell me, what it is that they have missed from this time, so that it can be, and I'll pull texts from all of that and create things, but it will be a record of what people were going through in this moment, and also a warning to future generations, because we probably will go through this again, about what not to take for granted. And I think that's a very important lesson too. Um, and but it's a really good question. I'll tell you one thing. I believe in talent, and I believe big talent always finds a platform. And if the platform doesn't exist, it creates the platform. So I think this technology that we're experiencing now, as well as other ideas, are going to come into it, and it's all going to be part of our live experience in theaters and on the stage, as well as in our homes. I think there's going to be a real shift of the axis right now. I'm pretty excited to see what happens.
I am too.
Yeah.
Like you, I have no idea what the trajectory is, other than from crisis to opportunity. And even this series, Artistry Today, simply was to keep art and the discussion of art at the forefront.
Yeah.
And I don't want art and music to be out of sight, out of mind,
Right.
because sadly, so often out of sight, out of mind means funding goes with it. And I won't become political other than to say it would be easy to redirect arts funding into something more now, unless we fight for it. So Flicka, I wanted to get a little scoop, and I said, okay, give me something that will make Jake blush or something. And she told me to ask you about a cruise ship performance that you did with Joyce DiDonato and a piano. And then she also asked me she suggested I ask you about Bobby V.
Oh, sweet Bobby Fee. First, the cruise ship. Well, not that long ago, but I was invited to do by the Metropolitan Opera to do these cruises. We did one with Flicka to through the Baltic nations, and then we did a Mediterranean one, and we did a Great Lakes tour. But the one she's talking about, I did with Joyce DiDonato, and we were going to do 2 concerts. And the first one, the guy that had organized it from the Met came to my cabin door, because it was like an hour or 2 before, and he went, okay, they forgot to pull the real piano out of storage, so it's just an electronic piano, and it is in the case of a piano, but it's an electronic piano, and the curve of the piano is on the wrong side. because it was meant to be on this mirror thing when they do this big show on the ship. They
Of
use
course
these
it
like
was.
pianos, and so it's two pianos on each side. So of course the curves are both facing out. Well, the one that I got had the curve facing on the wrong side. So it was interesting. I said, Michael, please don't worry about it. Of course, I'll go with it. And of course, Joyce, who's so amazing and so lovely, she went with it too. But there have been better choices, and but it was memorable. That's so
We
funny.
recently did a choir performance on tour in Casablanca, in Morocco,
Oh, my God.
and we were at a center for in the heart of the slums, and we had about 250 people packed into this room,
Yeah.
and we opened our program with Randall Thompson's "The Last Words of David." Bum, ba-da-lium, ba-da-lium, ba-da-lium. And just on that third the electric piano that they had for us on a rickety stand, the pianist goes brilliant, and the whole thing goes straight down on the floor. And it's one of those moments as a conductor. I mean, what do you, the piece can't survive. So you just turn to the audience and start laughing with them and move on. But so who's Bobby V?
Oh, Bobby V. Cooney. She was a lovely woman in Houston, who is a big supporter of the Houston Grand Opera, but she was sort of big Texas heart and soul personified. I was lucky enough to meet her and introduce her at a big young artist event down there. Oh gosh, back in 2008 when we were premiering 3 Decembers. And she was so lovely and larger than life. And she hadn't been told what to do once she got on the stage. And so I introduced her, and she was looking at me walking on going, where do I go? What do I do? Where do I go? What do I do? What do I do? And so I kind of had to guide her through the whole thing, even though I myself didn't actually know. So it was just one of those improvisatory moments on the stage but she was so lovely and so funny. I did have a performance one time where I was in the middle of a performance and the entire pedal system under the piano fell off and went crashing to the floor in the middle of the performance. That was very interesting. So I couldn't use pedals for the rest of the show. And it was a lot of French music, which, so it was dry.
You got your legato playing exercise that night.
Wow.
That's amazing. So when I set out to do these little interviews, I was thinking about the model, and I always loved James Lipton's Inside the Actors Studio.
Yeah.
And he ended every interview with a series of 10 questions that he never claimed as being his own. He always credited Bernard Pivot, who stole them apparently from Marcel Proust. So I've adapted them slightly for you tonight. And we'll just have a little fun with this, and I'm keeping it clean. But what's your favorite word, Jake?
I'd say it again. You cut out.
What's your favorite word?
Yes.
What's your least favorite word?
Goodbye.
What turns you off?
Oh, hypocrisy.
What sound or noise do you love?
Oh, children laughing in the distance or next door, as long as it's not the middle of the night, but children laughing for sure.
I'm very willing to ship you mine right now. You can have them.
You can tell I don't have children at home.
54 days at home, I think we are today, but who's counting? What sound or noise do you hate?
Oh, anything that's in distress. I think of like animals in distress, children, people in distress. That's really, really hard to hear. Yeah.
What piece did you always want to compose but never got around to doing so?
I hope I'm not done yet. I really want to. I really want to write a bunch of concerti. I want to write a violin concerto, a clarinet concerto, a cello concerto, a big piano concerto. I just am interested in going back to instrumental music sometime and writing those kinds of pieces. Yeah.
Is there a piece of music that you wished you hadn't composed?
That I hadn't composed. If there is, I've forgotten it. And that's really lucky about my brain, is that once I finish with a piece, I have to put it out of my mind so that I can get into the next piece, and my brain allows me to do that. So there are pieces that someone has brought to me that are like 15, 20 years old, and I listen to them and I go like, I wrote that. And then I
Mm.
start analyzing it like, now why did I do that? I wonder what I was thinking when I did that, because it's
Which
gone.
tied beautifully into our previous question.
Yeah, yeah.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Oh, I've had so many careers and lives already. Um, what would I want to be? See, I was a PR guy. I was a writer. I was a concert producer. I've been a pianist and page turner and, and composer. I like composer the best. Um, if there is another, gosh, what would it be? Um, Something that's very solitary, because I'm used to being very solitary.
Mm.
Oh, you know what it would be? Running a nursery, a plant nursery. Garden, flowers, plants. Things that won't criticize me.
Mhm. Oh, I can relate to that. Yeah. What's your dream of happiness, Jake?
Oh, you know, I think I'm living it. I've been so incredibly lucky. I've been through some really hard times. My father's death, losing my career for a while when, I lost my ability to play the piano because of a focal dystonia for a while, but that opened up other doors. And I'm living my best life. I'm so happy right now. I feel so blessed. I have a wonderful husband. I have a wonderful family. We have a son who's going to be 25 this year, and he's gainfully employed. Um, and we live in a beautiful place, and I get to do something that I love. I can't, this is contentment. It just makes me, I feel unbelievably grateful.
That's
Yeah.
yeah. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say as you arrive at the gates?
So I have this idea for a new composition, and you're the one.
And you are the one. I love the fact that that's perfect timing, because one of my friends here in Dallas, who plays in the Dallas Opera Orchestra, Liesel, she would like you to write a viola concerto.
Yes, I love the viola. I love the viola. That would be great. Feature the viola.
So, Jake, it is such a joy to speak with you. I hope that our paths cross in person again soon.
So good to see you,
Keep
Jonathan.
in touch. My love to Kurt
Thank you.
and just your family, and I
Yeah.
can't wait to celebrate you in April in New York, and
Thank you.
it'll be great.
Thank you. It's so nice to see you. Thanks ever so much for having me on.
All
Appreciate it.
right. Hey, friends, next week we have composer Morten Lauridsen, the amazing, amazing, amazing composer of choral music. Those of you that know Didier Don know certainly Morten Lauridsen. And we, following May 21st, have the iconic American mezzo-soprano Denise Graves. So I look forward to seeing you again next week, and have a good night. Stay safe. Good night.